Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I shall die, and there I will be buried. These words are familiar for many of us. Certainly anyone who's been to a number of weddings has heard this passage from the book of Ruth read. Most often, of course, it is in reference to the bride and groom, speaking words of fidelity and commitment that is intended to represent their love and the faithfulness that they're going to live out through the course of their life. But the origin of these words are very different than the way in which they're spoken at a wedding. The origins of these words are not spoken between a future husband and his wife, nor are they spoken at a time of great celebration or coming together of the whole family. In fact, these familiar words come from a moment that might be unfamiliar to a lot of us. I'm Ryan Barnett. I'm the lead pastor at First Methodist Waco, and I'm excited to begin this 5-part series, a teaching on the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth is an exhilarating exposition of the grace of God and the way He works redemptively in our lives against all odds. It's a story of faith and faithfulness. It's a story of poverty and redemption. It's a story that each of us can identify with in our own way. I want to invite you to join me in this great story that tells the character of our God through His work in one family's experience. The story of Ruth begins in Bethlehem. It begins with a man named Elimelech, who is married to Naomi, and they have 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. There comes a great famine in the land, so much so that people are not able to produce a harvest on their own family's land. And so Elimelech gathers up his family and takes them across the river Jordan into the land of Moab. While they're there living in the land of Moab, Elimelech dies, leaving Naomi a widow. But at this point, Naomi's still okay because even though she doesn't have a husband, she does have 2 strong sons. During this time, her 2 strong sons choose to get married to Moabite women. They marry Orpah and Ruth, and things are going fine for about 10 years. 10 years go by, and then, for some unknown or unsaid reason, both of Naomi's sons, Mahlon and Chilion, both die. Now it's at this moment that Naomi is in trouble. Naomi is in trouble because her status, which was granted by her husband first and then her sons, has now been erased. Neither of her sons had produced an heir. And so, as a woman in her day, without husband, without son, without child to support or sustain her, she was effectively ruined. She had no means of sustaining her life. She had no property and no hope of gaining any. What's more, she had no ability other than begging to support herself. It was a tough time for Naomi and for her family. What's more, we know that there had been this long-running famine back in her hometown, so all the people there also were having to experience the effects of an economic recession and depression that afflicted the whole of the land. To make matters even worse, this period of history in the ancient Near East was not an easy one in which to live, certainly and especially for women and people who were in poverty. In the Bible, it's known as the book of the Judges, a time that's defined when people in society were, quote, doing what was right in their own eyes. The interpretation and meaning of that is that people did what was in their own self-interest, regardless of the consequences to anyone around them, even if it brought devastation, violence, and ruin. So here is Naomi, who is now without husband, without son, without means of supporting herself, without a home of her own, living at a time that is exemplified by people's selfishness and their unwillingness to do anything for anyone else, but only doing what is right in their own eyes. To say it's a desperate time for Naomi is a dramatic understatement. Naomi hears that the famine is coming to a close in Bethlehem and decides to return home. It's understandable. Naomi is no doubt thinking, look, I can either be impoverished here amongst strangers, or I can go back and be impoverished in my own community, in my own hometown, amongst the people with whom I grew up, people who have known me for a long time, and even some of my own relatives. And so she tells her daughters-in-law about her plan to return home. They gather everything up, and they're on the road headed back to Bethlehem when Naomi seems to have some sort of change of heart. She stops and she turns to her two daughters-in-law, and she says to them, daughters, you should stay here in Moab. You should stay here among your own people. Maybe Naomi realized that if it was hard for her as someone from Israel living in Moab, then it would be equally hard for these two Moabite women living in Israel, especially if they're all going to be living in poverty. But for whatever reason, she turns to her daughters-in-law and says to them, look, out of compassion for you, out of love for you, I'm telling you, don't come with me. And both of her daughters-in-law object and say, no, we're going to stay together. We're a family. We're going to be here. And Naomi then digs in her heels and she says, no, listen, there is nothing for you if you follow me. And then she tells them something that may seem strange to someone who's not familiar with Israelite customs in the ancient Near East. She says to them, look, what do you think's going to happen? I'm already old and past childbearing, and even if I was to find a husband today and have a child by him, are you really going to wait until he grows up so that you can marry him? And what Naomi is talking about is a particular part of the law of God given to his people. It comes from Deuteronomy chapter 25, and it's commonly known as the Levirate law. And what it says is, if two brothers are living together and one of them dies without a male heir, it is his brother's responsibility to marry his widow and to father a child by her. And what's more, that child is to be considered the dead brother's heir, not the living one. Now, that may seem to some of you to be a bit foreign in concept, and certainly in our modern society it wouldn't really fly, but see it for what it is. It was a gift of grace from God to women living in a patriarchal society who, if they lost their husband and had no male descendant, became destitute, just as Naomi had experienced. And so what Naomi is saying is, if she were to have a son, that son then could carry on the family name and be the inheritor of the family's estate and property upon which the whole family could then support themselves. But she's telling her daughters-in-law, look, that's impossible. What she says, in fact, is there is no hope. There is no hope for me. There is no hope for our family line. There is no hope that we will ever have property or land upon which we can support ourselves ever again. All that's left for us is misery, poverty, and death. So go home. You're young, maybe at least in your father's house, you have a chance to live. And so one of her daughters-in-law says in tears, I'll miss you, I love you, but yes, I'm going to go home and try to recover some semblance of a life. And what's interesting is Naomi says to her, go with your father and your own gods. In other words, these daughters-in-law had adopted the God of Elimelech's house, the God of their husbands, that is Yahweh, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and so forth and so on. But when she's departing the family, she's not just departing the family, she's also departing worship of the one true God and going back to worship the gods of her ancestors, the gods of Moab. Ruth makes a different decision. Ruth makes the decision that she is going to stay with Naomi come what may. It is in this moment on the road between Moab and Bethlehem, having heard that the future life she's going to live is one of poverty, one of begging, and one with no hope and no future, that Ruth says to her mother-in-law, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." Now you can see why it's a somewhat odd scripture, really, to be read at a celebration of a marriage between a husband and wife. This was not a celebratory moment. This was not a happy occasion. These were two women marching down a road of extraordinary poverty, isolation, with no hope and no future. It was a death compact that we will live and die together in the poverty in which we have been thrust by circumstances outside of our control. What's extraordinary is Ruth then follows that statement up, not just doubling, but tripling down on her commitment, saying that she pledges to be faithful to this promise at penalty of death from the God that she serves. That is Yahweh, the God of Israel. She says, I'm not going to go back to those other gods that I was worshiping. There evidently was something that Ruth had discovered in Elimelech's household, living there in a faithful house to God, that she wanted to hold on to, that was worth sacrificing for. She had evidently experienced something about the nature of this God that she was willing to hold on to Him and hold on to His people, even if it led her into a life of sacrifice and poverty. In that moment, she commended her life into the hands of God, the God of Israel. And so they make their way to Bethlehem. When they arrive there in Bethlehem, they begin their life. A life of poverty, a life of picking up the remnants of what other people have left behind in order to feed themselves, to sustain their life. It's not a good situation by any stretch of the imagination. When they arrived there in Bethlehem, Naomi's friends who knew her back when looked at her and said, "Wow, Naomi, you're home. It's good to see you." And Naomi's response was, "Don't call me Naomi anymore." The name Naomi means pleasant. She comes home and the people say, "It's good to see you again. We remember you. We remember how joy-filled you were, how full of life you were. We remember that you are a pleasant person, a joy to be around, that you have good things in your life. After all, you had that strong husband and those two strong sons to support you and your household, and you had everything at your fingertips. You were Naomi, and it's good to see you." And she says, "Don't call me Naomi anymore." And she says, "I'm not that person." She says, "Now you should call me Mara," which means bitterness. She says, "Because everything in my life now is bitter." She says, I'm remorseful about the way this life has turned out. If it could go wrong, it has gone wrong. We had a famine, we left our home, we packed up, we moved to a new place. We tried to make a go of it there, and my husband died. But we soldiered on through that great tragedy, and then one by one, both of my sons died. And what's more, they never had any children of their own. And then poverty found us, and we had to make the hard decision to pack up again and come back here to humble ourselves in front of everyone. I've lost one of my daughters-in-law. The other has come with me, but there's nothing that we can do about our circumstance and our poverty. I've lost everything. I've got nothing. Anything that could befall me has, and I've got nothing left except to endure the bitterness of each day. So here I am. What a hard start to what turns into a beautiful story. What a hard start. But what a dramatic testimony it begins. You see, the work of redemption and healing that God is going to do in this little family does not come to a perfect little nuclear family who's had everything handed to them that looks perfect from all sides. No. This story of redemption begins at a point where there is no more hope, where there is only bitterness remaining, where the people are completely out of options. And it begins with two women who have zero legal status in the society in which they're living and zero means of supporting themselves. And yet each in their own way has held on to their faith and their trust in God. We see it dramatically in Ruth, in her willingness to enter into the poverty of her mother-in-law in order to hold on to that relationship with her and her God. But we see it in Naomi too, don't we? We see it in Naomi even in the midst of her bitterness, calling to mind the promises of God, knowing His word and His law, offering freedom for her daughters-in-law, and returning to her ancestral home that she might take advantage of the small graces that are offered in Israelite law to care for widows and orphans. Yes, Naomi is bitter. Yes, she has lost hope. But she remains faithful to God's word. From that smallest of seeds, from the grip she has just by the tips of her fingernails, holding on, great and incredible work is going to be done by her God. Blessing will come to Ruth and to Naomi because of the greatness of the God they serve. Stay tuned.
In the crushing, in the pressing, you are making new wine. In the soil I now surrender, you are breaking new ground. So I yield to you and to your careful hand. When I trust you, I don't need to understand. So make me your vessel, and make me an offering. Make me whatever you want me to be. God, I came here with nothing but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. in the crushing, in the pressing, you are making new wine. In the soil I now surrender, you are breaking new ground. Oh, you are breaking new ground. So make me your vessel and make me an offering. Make me whatever you want me to be. Came here with nothing but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Oh, Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Oh, Jesus, bring new wine out of me. 'Cause where there is new wine, there is new power, there is new freedom, and the kingdom is here. I lay down my old flame to carry your new fire today. So make me a vessel and make me an offering. Make me whatever you want me to be. God, I came here with nothing but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Oh, Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Oh, Jesus, bring new wine out of me.
You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. To you only, to you only. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones